Get ready to plunge into the shadowy world of Stonehaven Citadel, where a chilling secret threatens to tear a kingdom apart. She was just a faceless scullery maid, trying to survive. He was the ruthless, all-seeing High Lord, haunted by the weight of his iron crown. The horrifying truth etched onto her skin is about to pull him into a war far more dangerous than any political intrigue. Will he risk his dominion and everything he's sworn to protect for one broken girl? You won't believe the choice he has to make. This epic tale starts now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss a single chapter. The new day crept over Stonehaven Citadel, hesitant and gray, painting the ancient stone battlements with long, cold shadows. High Lord Marius Stonehaven stood at his window, surveying the vast, mist-shrouded valleys that defined his territory. He was only 32, but the 15 years since he'd inherited this domain, following the plague that took his father, had carved lines of experience and weary isolation onto his face. From his vantage point, he watched the territories he had inherited at 17, shouldering burdens that had aged him far beyond his years. The stone battlements, built by his ancestors, had been his constant companion, silent witness to every difficult decision and every solitary dawn. His massive ironwood desk was a fortress of burdens: grain yields from the distant northern holds, trade tariffs and tax assessments from merchant guilds whose loyalty was perpetually questionable, and urgent military dispatches from border patrols detailing skirmishes with neighboring provinces. Each piece of parchment demanded a calculated decision that held the fate of thousands in its balance. The stacks of correspondence would have crushed a lesser man, but Marius approached them with a methodical, almost clinical precision that had kept his barony prosperous, while adjacent lands succumbed to internal conflict and devastating famine. His venerable steward, Master Aldous, often remarked that the High Lord possessed an uncanny, almost unnatural ability to read between the written lines, detecting deception hidden deep within formal, flowery language and identifying threats long before they could fully materialize. This morning proved no different as Marius scrutinized a suspiciously urgent request for additional troops from Baron Hemlock, whose recent messages had contained subtle, almost imperceptible inconsistencies that suggested potential disloyalty and even rebellion brewing in the volatile southern provinces. Trust no one completely, question everything, and maintain emotional distance from all decisions, his father had counseled during those final, fever-ridden weeks. A ruler who allows personal feelings to cloud judgment endangers everyone who depends upon his wisdom. This ruthless philosophy had served Marius well through 15 years of iron rule, transforming him from an inexperienced youth into a leader whose reputation for calculated, fearsome intelligence extended throughout the entire realm. Yet this morning, as he prepared for another day of cold, administrative duties, he felt the familiar, crushing weight of absolute authority, the chilling knowledge that his position demanded the constant sacrificing of all personal desires for the greater, often abstract, good of his people. A whisper-soft knock broke his concentration, interrupting his quiet contemplation of crop yields that required careful redistribution to prevent starvation in the deep winter. "Enter," he commanded, without glancing up from the documents. "Your morning tonic, my lord." The voice was barely a breath, so quiet that he nearly missed the words entirely. He looked up to see Elara, the scullery maid who had joined his sprawling household 6 months earlier. She moved with a strange, defensive economy, each step carefully placed to avoid drawing any attention to her small frame. Her rich chestnut hair was braided with the severe, almost military efficiency that marked all castle staff, and her large brown eyes remained fixed entirely on the silver chalice she carried in both hands. In the months since her arrival, he had noted her tireless diligence and her complete silence, but he had never truly observed her as an individual. She performed her arduous duties without complaint, never asked for any special consideration, and seemed to possess an unnatural talent for blending into the castle's hectic daily routines, like morning mist silently dissipating into the sunlight. Yet, something about her this morning struck his highly trained senses as subtly different, a flicker of unnatural tension, an anxious alertness in her movements that his methodical observation couldn't ignore. "Good morning, Elara," he acknowledged, laying down his quill to study her approach more carefully. She placed the chalice on the desk with the same practiced, meticulous care she always displayed. But as she quickly drew her hands away, her rough sleeve snagged for a fraction of a second on the silver rim. The thick fabric slipped back just enough, revealing what she had desperately been trying to hide beneath the heavy material. Dark, angry bruises circled her delicate wrist like twisted, purpling ropes, some shockingly fresh and angry, others older, fading to sickly yellow and green. The sight landed in Marius's chest with an unexpected, cold shock. In all his years of command, he had witnessed the gruesome aftermath of border battles, negotiated with enemies who would gladly see him dead, and made cold decisions that cost lives for the greater political good. But this quiet, deliberate malice inflicted upon someone completely defenseless under his personal protection triggered a cold, consuming fury that transcended all political calculation. Elara's eyes snapped up, finding his gaze, and then she yanked the sleeve down with desperate haste, her face flooding with immediate shame and what he now recognized as pure, stark fear. Not the respectful reverence that servants typically showed their lords, but genuine, visceral terror of discovery and its potential, unknown consequences. "I must return to the kitchens, my lord," she stammered, already backing toward the door with jerky, fearful movements that confirmed his growing suspicions about her dire circumstances. "Elara." His voice was low, carrying the unmistakable, quiet authority that made seasoned knights pause mid-sentence. "Remain." She froze instantly, like a deer sensing wolves nearby, her entire body radiating the desperate desire to flee, yet recognizing the absolute impossibility of disobeying a direct command from the High Lord. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing toward the heavy wooden chair positioned across from his desk. "My lord, truly, I must sit." "Sit." The single, repeated word carried the weight of 15 years of absolute authority, refined through countless negotiations where lives and kingdoms depended upon his ability to project unshakable confidence and total control. Elara perched on the chair's edge like a sparrow prepared for immediate flight. Her small hands twisted together in her lap while her eyes remained fixed on the floor stones, worn smooth by generations of Stonehaven lords who had conducted their unforgiving business in this very chamber. As Marius studied her carefully controlled posture and the way she seemed to attempt to make herself as small and invisible as possible, he realized that the methodical routine of his morning had been irrevocably shattered. The stacks of administrative duties that typically consumed his every waking thought faded into background concerns as a new, immediate priority emerged. Discovering who dared harm someone under his protection and ensuring they faced consequences that would serve as a brutal example. The documents on his desk would wait. Justice, however, would not. The silence stretched between them, taut and agonizing, like a bowstring drawn to its breaking point. Marius had interrogated enough prisoners to immediately recognize the meticulous mental architecture of a lie being constructed. And Elara's carefully neutral, frozen expression told him that whatever explanation she offered would be precisely crafted to deflect rather than illuminate the horrifying truth. "Tell me what happened to your wrist," he asked, keeping his tone deceptively gentle despite the cold, analytical calculation building relentlessly in his mind. "Nothing of consequence, my lord. I am naturally clumsy and struck it against the damp stone wall while carrying heavy buckets from the well." The words came out in a practiced, mechanical rush, as if she had rehearsed this precise explanation multiple times in silent terror. Marius leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same methodical, penetrating attention he applied to diplomatic negotiations, where every subtle gesture and word choice revealed hidden meanings and dangerous intentions. Elara's story contained several blatant inconsistencies that his trained mind immediately catalogued. The precise, symmetrical nature of the bruising suggested fingers rather than the random impact of rough stone. The symmetrical pattern indicated a deliberate, powerful grip rather than accidental contact, and her palpable, Nervous energy spoke volumes of stark fear rather than simple embarrassment about clumsiness. "And both wrists?" he inquired softly, noting how she unconsciously rubbed her other arm through the fabric of her sleeve, confirming his growing suspicion. Her face went utterly pale, confirming his immediate suspicion that the physical damage extended beyond what he had accidentally witnessed. "Yes, my lord. As I said, I am very clumsy." "Show me." "My lord, really, there is no need." "Show me." His voice remained low, but it carried the unmistakable, absolute weight of authority that had never been successfully challenged within his domain. Elara's hands trembled violently as she slowly pushed back both sleeves, revealing matching sets of finger-shaped bruises that painted a clear, sickening picture of someone seizing her with violent, controlled intent. The marks were too precise, too uniform, and too recent to support any explanation involving accidents or clumsiness. Something protective and primal shifted deep within Marius's chest, a fierce instinct he hadn't experienced since his younger sister's death from fever a decade earlier. The intensity of the sensation caught him completely off guard, as did the sheer strength of the cold, consuming rage building rapidly behind his carefully maintained facade of controlled composure. He had dedicated his adult life to maintaining emotional distance, preventing any personal attachments that might compromise his absolute judgment. Yet seeing this undeniable evidence of deliberate cruelty towards someone he was duty-bound to protect triggered a response that transcended mere political calculation. "Who did this to you?" The question emerged with a deceptive, terrifying calm that masked the storm gathering violently in his thoughts. "No one, my lord. I told you, Elara." He leaned forward slowly, capturing her frightened gaze with his own intense, silver eyes. "You serve in my household, under my roof, eating bread purchased with my coin. That makes you my responsibility, and I take my responsibilities with deadly seriousness. Do you understand what that means?" For a single, fragile moment, hope, bright and desperate, flickered in her brown eyes like a candle flame fighting against a strong wind. Her lips parted as if she might finally speak the truth instead of the carefully constructed lies. Then, paralyzing fear reasserted itself, and she stood abruptly. "I truly should return to my duties, my lord. The cook will wonder at my absence." Marius watched her flee from his presence with movements that confirmed every suspicion he had developed during their brief conversation. Someone was systematically terrorizing a member of his household, and that someone possessed enough influence or wielded enough intimidation to ensure her complete silence, even when offered the High Lord's personal, powerful protection. The realization troubled him on multiple, deep levels. His reputation for fiercely protecting those under his authority was absolutely integral to maintaining loyalty and stability throughout his complex domain. If word spread that he couldn't safeguard his own servants, it would encourage immediate challenges from ambitious, predatory lords who might interpret such weakness as an opportunity for territorial expansion or political manipulation. More disturbing was his intensely personal reaction to Elara's plight. The protective, consuming anger he felt transcended simple feudal obligation. It encompassed something dangerously close to emotional investment. Such feelings represented exactly the kind of personal attachment his father had explicitly warned against, the trap that could compromise a ruler's objectivity and lead to decisions based on sentiment rather than strategic, hard-headed wisdom. Yet, as he returned to his correspondence, Marius found concentration utterly impossible. The image of those deliberate, sickening bruises haunted his thoughts, along with the terrified, desperate way Elara had fled rather than accept his offer of protection. Someone in his domain was using violence to control a defenseless young woman, and they felt confident enough in their position to continue such behavior despite her employment in the High Lord's personal household. By midday, his patience with the endless administrative duties had evaporated entirely. Marius summoned his captain of the guards, Sir Caelan Thorne, a grizzled, scarred veteran whose loyalty had been tested in brutal battles that had claimed lesser men. If anyone could uncover the cold truth behind Elara's injuries, it would be Caelan. "I need information immediately," Marius stated without preamble when the captain arrived. "Elara," "The scullery maid who brings my morning tonic. Someone has been harming her, and I want to know who possesses the audacity to abuse a member of my personal household." Kaelin's weathered features darkened with the grim expression that had intimidated enemies across 3 duchies. "I'll discover the truth, my lord. And when you do, we'll discuss the appropriate responses." "But, Kaelin, discretion is essential," Marius cautioned. "If this involves someone with political connections, I need to understand the full scope of the situation before taking decisive action." As his captain departed to begin the covert investigation, Marius acknowledged that his day had taken an irrevocable turn. The administrative duties that normally consumed his entire attention now seemed utterly trivial compared to the pressing mystery of who dared harm someone under his direct protection, and why they felt confident enough to continue such behavior. The High Lord of Stonehaven had built his fearsome reputation on methodical intelligence and calculated, ruthless responses to threats. Now those very skills would be applied to a problem that touched something far deeper than political obligation, a fierce, growing determination to protect someone who had begun to matter to him in ways that challenged everything he believed about maintaining emotional distance from personal attachments. The investigation would begin immediately, and when it concluded, justice would follow with the same inevitable certainty that characterized all of his decisions. Some lines simply could not be crossed without consequence, regardless of who felt entitled to cross them. Evening brought Kaelin back to Marius's chamber with crucial intelligence that transformed suspicion into cold, strategic certainty. The captain's expression carried the grim satisfaction of a hunter who had tracked dangerous prey to its lair, confirming precisely what Marius had feared. This situation extended far beyond simple domestic violence into the dangerous realm of political intimidation and abuse of noble privilege. "It is Lord Torvin Voss, my lord," Kaelin reported without preamble, his scarred hands clasped behind his back in military posture. Son of minor nobility from the Eastern Marches, and nephew to the powerful Lord Commander Torvin Voss of the Royal Guard. He and the girl were betrothed before she came to serve in your household. Marius's jaw tightened as the dangerous implications became clear. Lord Commander Torvin Voss commanded significant influence at the royal court. His position granted him direct access to the king's ear and considerable political power to protect family members from consequences that would utterly destroy ordinary knights or citizens. Torvin's abuse of Elara wasn't random violence, it was calculated intimidation, backed by political connections that made him effectively untouchable through conventional justice. The betrothal was broken when her father couldn't provide the agreed dowry, Kaelin continued. But Voss refuses to accept the dissolution. He's been cornering her in the village, claiming she belongs to him by prior contract, regardless of changed circumstances. And the local magistrate, he added, though the answer was already obvious, refuses to intervene. Voss's connections to the royal court make him immune through normal legal channels. He's been openly boasting in taverns about reclaiming his stolen property and making detailed inquiries about Stonehaven Citadel's defenses. The casual, chilling audacity struck Marius like a physical blow. Not content with terrorizing Elara through private violence, Torvin was now treating her as chattel while simultaneously gathering critical intelligence about local defenses, behavior that bordered on treason, yet remained protected by his powerful uncle's influence at court. "There's more, my lord." Kaelin's tone carried a warning that worse revelations were forthcoming. "My contacts in the capital report that Torvin has been systematically accepting bribes from merchant houses seeking favorable trade arrangements, using his noble status to extort protection payments from traveling caravans. His uncle's position shields him completely from investigation." Marius absorbed this information with the cold, calculating detachment that had served him through 15 years of complex political maneuvering. Torvin Voss represented far more than a simple threat to one servant. He embodied systematic corruption that used noble privilege to exploit the vulnerable while actively undermining legitimate authority through sheer intimidation and political manipulation. "He's been asking about your daily routines," Kaelin added grimly. "Wants to know when you're away from the Citadel, how many guards accompany you during travels, which entrances offer the easiest access to the servant quarters." The final piece of intelligence transformed Marius's anger into something far more dangerous: strategic fury, backed by local authority and 15 years of ruthless experience dealing with threats to his domain. Torvin's behavior had escalated beyond harassment into direct preparation for action that could threaten Elara's safety and challenge Marius's authority simultaneously. "Double the guards on all entrances, effective immediately," Marius commanded. "Establish rotating, silent patrols through the servant quarters. I want armed, loyal men positioned where they can respond instantly to any unauthorized intrusion." "Already done, my lord." But if Voss decides to act through official channels, claiming theft of property or demanding satisfaction for perceived injuries, his uncle's influence could create severe complications at court. Marius understood the inherent danger. Direct confrontation with Torvin would almost certainly trigger political retaliation through royal authority, potentially forcing the king to choose between supporting a loyal High Lord's protection of his household and maintaining relations with the Lord Commander, whose loyalty was essential for court security. Such calculations had shaped every significant decision of his adult life. The prudent, safe course would be quietly arranging Elara's transfer to another, distant household, removing her from Torvin's reach while avoiding a damaging political confrontation. Yet, as he considered this practical, convenient solution, Marius found himself remembering the sheer terror in her eyes and the desperate way she had tried to conceal the evidence of the abuse. The protective instinct that had surprised him that morning now demanded action, regardless of the political consequences. A response that challenged everything he believed about maintaining emotional distance. "Continue gathering intelligence," Marius decided. "I want comprehensive, documented information about Torvin's activities, his personal debts, his associates, and any vulnerability that might provide leverage. If he wants to play political games, he'll discover that I've been practicing longer than he's been alive." As Kalen departed to continue his investigation, Marius acknowledged that his response to this situation was revealing aspects of his character that completely contradicted his carefully cultivated reputation for dispassionate, objective judgment. The smart political move would be arranging Elara's quiet departure to avoid confrontation with powerful enemies. Instead, he found himself meticulously planning strategies for protecting her while simultaneously destroying a man whose political connections should, by all rights, make him untouchable. The High Lord of Stonehaven was preparing for war. Not the kind fought with armies on battlefields, but the far more dangerous variety conducted through reputation, influence, and the careful manipulation of damaging information that could destroy enemies without leaving obvious evidence. Torvin Voss had made the colossal mistake of threatening someone under the High Lord's protection. Soon he would learn that political connections meant nothing when facing a ruler who understood how to use power with surgical precision, targeting vulnerabilities that even the Lord Commander's massive influence couldn't protect. 3 days of careful, covert observation confirmed Marius's growing conviction that Elara's situation was deteriorating rapidly, despite the increased security surrounding the citadel. She moved through her arduous duties with the brittle efficiency of someone functioning on pure nervous energy alone. Dark circles beneath her eyes spoke volumes of sleepless nights, while the way she held herself suggested someone braced for anticipated violence that could arrive without warning. During his morning routine in the training yard, Marius positioned himself where he could maintain a clear view of the servants' entrance while sparring with Sir Gareth, his master-at-arms. The physical exertion helped channel his mounting frustration into productive activity. Yet his attention remained constantly divided between refining combat techniques and the surveillance of potential threats to someone whose welfare had become increasingly vital to his peace of mind. "Your Grace seems deeply distracted," Gareth observed as they concluded their session, both men breathing heavily from the intense workout that had served as an outlet for Marius's suppressed anger about circumstances he couldn't immediately control through direct, open action. "Administrative concerns," Marius replied dismissively, unwilling to reveal how deeply Elara's plight had affected his emotional equilibrium, or to acknowledge that his carefully maintained attachment was crumbling rapidly in the face of one woman's genuine, undeniable need for protection that transcended all political obligation. The truth was far more complicated than simple distraction. Since discovering the physical evidence of the abuse, Marius found himself thinking about Elara at unexpected moments. He wondered about her mysterious background, questioned why she had remained completely silent about Torvin's harassment, and experienced protective instincts that fundamentally challenged his core beliefs about maintaining emotional distance from personal attachments that could compromise objective judgment. That afternoon brought deeply disturbing news from Kaelin's ongoing investigation. The captain entered Marius's chamber with the grim expression of someone who had uncovered information that would complicate an already difficult situation immeasurably. "Torvin visited the village yesterday, my lord," Kaelin reported grimly. "Cornered the girl outside the baker's shop, demanding she return to his custody voluntarily or face severe consequences for stolen goods claims he intends to file with royal magistrates." Marius's grip tightened on the quill he had been using to review tax assessments that now seemed utterly insignificant compared to the immediate, pressing threats to someone whose safety had become his personal, undeniable responsibility. Witnesses. Several, but they're too terrified to speak openly. Voss made certain his conversation was overheard. He wanted word to spread rapidly about his intentions. Torvin's escalating pressure, while maintaining the appearance of legal justification for his actions, revealed a sophisticated understanding of how to use political connections and legal technicalities to achieve objectives that direct violence might not accomplish as effectively. By claiming legal grievances related to broken contracts and stolen property, he could force Elara to choose between voluntary submission and official prosecution that would utterly destroy her reputation, while potentially implicating Marius as the harborer of stolen goods. "He left a message," Kaelin continued reluctantly. "Said to tell you that misunderstandings between nobles could be resolved through appropriate compensation, if you prefer avoiding unpleasant legal proceedings that might damage your reputation at court." The barely concealed, arrogant threat struck Marius as particularly audacious. Torvin was essentially demanding ransom for not pursuing fabricated legal claims, while simultaneously threatening political retaliation if his demands weren't immediately met. Such behavior demonstrated either remarkable confidence in his uncle's absolute protection or a dangerously naive underestimation of the High Lord's local authority and power. "He's giving you until tomorrow to respond," Kaelin added. "After that, he files formal complaints with royal authorities, claiming theft of contracted property and demanding immediate restitution." Marius absorbed this ultimatum with a calculating calm that had carried him through previous crises where wrong decisions could trigger disasters affecting thousands of lives. Every instinct demanded immediate, decisive action to crush this threat before it could metastasize into larger, national problems. Yet political reality required more subtle, covert approaches that wouldn't instantly trigger retaliation from court authorities whose support was essential for his duchy's security. The prudent response would be negotiating some face-saving compromise that satisfied Torvin's demands while protecting Elara through relocation to another, distant household. Such pragmatic solutions had preserved peace throughout his domain, maintaining stability through a careful balance of competing interests rather than principled stands that could trigger wider, unnecessary conflicts. Yet, as he considered this practical approach, Marius found himself remembering the desperate fear in Elara's eyes and the systematic nature of the abuse that would continue regardless of which household employed her. Compromise with Torvin would abandon her to ongoing victimization while setting a catastrophic precedent that local protection could be circumvented through sufficient political pressure and legal intimidation. "Double her security detail," he decided, the words emerging slowly and deliberately. "I want armed guards positioned to intervene instantly if Torvin attempts direct action. And, Kaelin, begin investigating Torvin's financial situation, his personal habits, his associates. If he wants to threaten me through legal manipulation, he'll discover that I know how to gather evidence for countercharges that his uncle's massive influence cannot protect him from." "My lord, if this escalates to open conflict with the Lord Commander's family..." "Then it escalates," Marius interrupted with a quiet, terrifying finality. "Some principles cannot be compromised without losing everything that makes authority legitimate. If protecting those under my care triggers political consequences, I'll face them with a clear conscience rather than surrender someone to systematic abuse for the sake of convenient peace." The decision marked a turning point in more than just his conflict with Torvin Voss. By choosing protection over pragmatism, Marius was acknowledging that Elara had become important enough to risk his carefully cultivated relationships with royal authorities. A recognition that challenged his fundamental beliefs about maintaining emotional distance from personal attachments. Tomorrow would bring Torvin's deadline. Tonight would be spent preparing responses that honored both strategic wisdom and moral obligation, regardless of the political storm that might follow. The High Lord of Stonehaven was discovering that some battles were absolutely worth fighting, even when victory carried costs he couldn't yet calculate. Dawn brought with it the crushing weight of a decision that would fundamentally reshape Marius's understanding of his own character. As he stood at his chamber window, watching the weak sun burn away the morning mist that clung stubbornly to the valleys below, he reflected on how a simple moment of observation had led to circumstances that challenged everything he believed about balancing personal desires against political responsibilities. The night had brought little sleep, his mind cycling endlessly through scenarios that ranged from diplomatic solutions to outright warfare, each option carrying consequences that could affect thousands of lives, depending on how political authorities responded to a challenge against noble privilege and court influence. Yet beneath these cold, strategic calculations lay something more fundamental, a growing recognition that some principles mattered more than political convenience. A soft knock interrupted his contemplation. "Enter," he called, already knowing that Elara would arrive with his morning tonic, her presence serving as a stark, vital reminder of why this decision had become unavoidable, despite its immense potential costs. She entered with the same careful, defensive movements he had observed for months. Yet now he noticed details that revealed the raw strain of living under constant threat. Dark circles beneath her eyes spoke of sleepless nights, while the way she held herself suggested someone bracing for anticipated violence that could arrive without warning. "Good morning, my lord," she whispered, approaching his desk with a chalice held tightly in both hands to prevent any nervous trembling from revealing her deep fear. "Elara," he said gently, setting aside correspondence that had occupied his attention but completely failed to distract from more pressing concerns. "We need to discuss your situation." She froze mid-step, her face going pale as she recognized that her dire circumstances had moved beyond private shame into official, local attention. "My lord, I don't understand." "Yes, you do." His tone carried quiet certainty rather than accusation. "Torvin Voss has issued an ultimatum, demanding your return to his custody. He threatens legal action if I refuse to surrender someone under my protection to systematic abuse that dishonors everything my authority represents." The chalice nearly slipped from her trembling hands before she managed to set it on his desk. "My lord, please don't involve yourself in my troubles. Sir Torvin has powerful connections that could bring severe harm to your reputation." Her concern for his welfare, despite her own desperate circumstances, struck Marius with unexpected, profound force. Here was someone more worried about protecting him from political consequences than securing her own immediate safety, a selfless act that challenged his assumptions about servant loyalty while fiercely reinforcing his determination to shield her from ongoing victimization. "My reputation will survive whatever political storms result from protecting those under my care," he replied with a conviction that surprised even himself. "The question is whether you're willing to accept that protection, knowing it may require testimony about the abuse you've suffered and witnessed." Elara stared at him with an expression that combined fragile hope with stark terror, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone with such power would risk using it on her behalf. "He'll destroy me, my lord. His uncle commands the royal guard. They can fabricate evidence, manipulate witnesses, turn legal proceedings into persecution that will leave me with nothing." "Only if they're allowed to control the narrative," Marius countered. "But what if we gather evidence first? What if we expose corruption and criminal behavior that even the Lord Commander cannot protect through political influence?" The possibility that victims might become prosecutors rather than remaining perpetual prey had clearly never occurred to her. Years of systematic intimidation had taught Elara to accept abuse as inevitable rather than seeking justice that might actually be achievable through careful planning and strategic action. "I need to know everything," Marius continued. "Every threat, every incident, every witness who might testify about Torvin's criminal behavior. If we're going to war against corrupt privilege, we'll do it with overwhelming, irrefutable evidence that destroys his credibility while protecting all innocent people from retaliation. For the first time since he had known her, Elara met his gaze directly. Something in her expression shifted from resignation to tentative, fierce determination, as if his absolute confidence in achieving justice had begun to rekindle a hope she had thought permanently extinguished. "He has gambling debts," she said quietly. "Substantial ones that he's been paying through extortion from merchants and travelers. The innkeeper's wife mentioned bribes he's taken for favorable testimony in legal disputes." Marius felt a profound satisfaction that had nothing to do with political calculation and everything to do with seeing someone begin to fight back against circumstances that had seemed hopeless.
Good.
What else? "There are other women," she admitted with difficulty. "Servants, merchant daughters, anyone he believes cannot seek protection through normal channels. He uses his position to demand favors in exchange for not pursuing fabricated charges." The systematic nature of Torvin's criminal enterprise revealed someone who had been operating with complete impunity for years, protected by his uncle's political influence while victimizing anyone too powerless to seek justice through official channels. Such behavior represented exactly the kind of corruption that undermined legitimate authority while making a cruel mockery of noble obligations to protect the vulnerable. "We'll expose everything," Marius promised with quiet finality. "By the time this investigation concludes, Torvin Voss will face justice for crimes that his uncle's position cannot shield him from. But I need your absolute commitment to see this through, regardless of the intimidation or threats that will inevitably come." Elara straightened with visible effort, her expression revealing someone choosing courage despite years of learned helplessness that had taught her to expect betrayal rather than protection from those with the power to make a difference in her circumstances. "I'll testify," she said with a voice that grew stronger as she spoke. "If you truly believe justice is possible, I'll tell the truth about everything he's done." The moment marked a profound transformation for both of them. She was choosing to trust despite experience that taught caution, while he was committing to a battle that would test every skill he possessed as a strategist and leader, determined to achieve victory against seemingly impossible odds. "Then we begin today," Marius declared. "Kalen will coordinate gathering evidence, while I reach out to other nobles who've suffered under Torvin's corruption. If he wants to threaten me through political manipulation, he'll discover that I know how to fight such battles more effectively than he imagines possible." As Elara departed with something approaching confidence rather than her usual fearful urgency, Marius acknowledged that he had crossed a line that would reshape his understanding of what it meant to be a leader worthy of the loyalty others placed in his judgment and protection. The war for justice had begun, and he intended to win it decisively. The war room beneath Stonehaven Citadel had witnessed strategy sessions for conflicts spanning 3 generations of High Lords. Its massive stone walls bearing silent witness to decisions that had shaped the political landscape throughout the Northern Territories. Now it hosted a different kind of battle planning. As Marius coordinated intelligence-gathering operations designed to expose corruption that extended far beyond Torvin Voss into sprawling networks of privilege and influence that had operated with complete impunity for years. Kalen spread documents across the massive oak table that dominated the chamber, each piece of evidence representing another crucial thread in the web of criminal behavior they were methodically unraveling. Financial records, detailed witness statements, correspondence intercepted through careful surveillance, all painted a sickening picture of systematic exploitation that made Torvin's abuse of Elara merely one crime among many that demanded immediate, brutal justice. "The gambling debts are substantial," Kalen reported with grim satisfaction. "He owes gold to merchant houses in 3 different cities. Moneylenders who've grown impatient with delayed payments. More importantly, we have sworn testimony from witnesses who can prove he's been using royal authority to extort payments that fund his addiction." Marius studied the financial documentation with the analytical precision that had made him one of the most effective administrators in the realm. The numbers told a story of progressive desperation, masked by apparent wealth. Torvin had been living far beyond his legitimate means, using his powerful position to generate illegal income that supported a lifestyle he couldn't afford through honest sources. These merchants he's been extorting, Marius mused. Will they testify if they are guaranteed absolute protection from retaliation? Already secured their cooperation, Kalin confirmed. They're tired of paying bribes to conduct honest business. Lord Aldwin has agreed to provide sanctuary for any witnesses who fear retribution, while Lord Hemlock is documenting similar extortion attempts in his territory. The growing coalition of nobles willingly challenging Torvin's corruption represented a strategic victory in itself. By framing this conflict as a righteous crusade against systematic abuse rather than a personal dispute between individual lords, Marius was building political cover that would make it virtually impossible for the Lord Commander to protect his nephew without appearing to openly endorse criminal behavior that threatened legitimate commerce and noble authority across the realm. What about the royal treasury investigation? Marius inquired, referring to the most damaging discovery Kalin had uncovered during his careful research into Torvin's financial activities. Confirmed, Kalin replied with an expression that suggested particular satisfaction with this revelation. He's been skimming gold intended for border fortifications, falsifying reports to cover shortfalls while using the stolen funds to pay gambling debts. We have documentation proving theft from royal coffers, a crime that even his powerful uncle cannot protect him from without appearing treasonous himself. The evidence of theft from royal resources transformed their conflict from a local dispute into a matter of national security that would force court authorities to choose between justice and corruption. No amount of political influence could shield someone who had stolen directly from the crown, regardless of family connections or previous services that might have earned protection under different circumstances. The timeline for presentation to royal authorities. Marius asked, recognizing that coordination would be absolutely essential for achieving maximum impact while preventing Torvin from destroying key evidence or eliminating witnesses who could testify about his criminal enterprise. Lord Aldous has arranged an audience with the king for next week, Kalin reported. As Lord High Steward, his word carries weight equal to the Lord Commander's influence. When he presents evidence of systematic theft and corruption, it will be impossible to dismiss as mere political maneuvering or a personal vendetta. Marius nodded approvingly at the strategic sophistication of their approach. By working through multiple, respected lords who had suffered under Torvin's extortion, while presenting evidence to royal authorities through channels that commanded respect, they were making it politically impossible for anyone to defend criminal behavior without appearing complicit in corruption that threatened the very foundation of lawful governance. Elara's testimony will be crucial, he observed, understanding that personal accounts of abuse would humanize what might otherwise appear as abstract financial crimes requiring complex analysis to understand their significance for ordinary subjects who relied upon noble protection from exactly this kind of exploitation. She's been meeting with the other victims, Kalin reported, helping them understand that testimony given in coordination with multiple witnesses provides protection through numbers that individual accusations might lack. They're finding courage through solidarity that none possessed when facing intimidation alone. The transformation of isolated victims into organized, powerful witnesses represented a political development that would make their case virtually impossible to dismiss through character assassination or intimidation tactics that had previously kept Torvin's crimes hidden from official scrutiny. Multiple, corroborating testimonies from diverse sources would create overwhelming evidence that even the most skilled advocates could not effectively challenge. The Lord Commander's response to these developments? Marius inquired, knowing that Torvin Voss would not remain passive while evidence mounted relentlessly against his nephew's criminal behavior. Increasingly desperate attempts to discredit the investigation, Kalin replied grimly. He's been spreading rumors about a political conspiracy designed to damage royal authority through fabricated charges against loyal knights. But his influence is visibly waning as more nobles join the coalition demanding justice for systematic corruption. The political momentum was shifting decisively in their favor as corruption was exposed and victims found the courage to speak truth that had been suppressed through years of intimidation and fear of brutal retaliation. Yet Marius understood that cornered predators often became most dangerous when facing inevitable defeat, making it essential to maintain security while preventing desperate actions that could harm innocent people. Double protection for all witnesses, he commanded. If Torvin realizes his political shields are crumbling, he may attempt to eliminate evidence through violence rather than face justice through legal proceedings that will expose the full scope of his criminal enterprise. As evening settled over Stonehaven Citadel and preparations continued for the confrontation that would determine whether justice could triumph over privileged corruption, Marius reflected on how much his understanding of leadership had evolved since discovering the physical evidence of abuse that challenged his fundamental beliefs about maintaining emotional distance from personal attachments. Protecting Elara had become protecting principle itself. The very idea that authority existed to shield the vulnerable rather than exploit them, that power carried the solemn obligation to serve justice rather than personal advantage, and that some battles were absolutely worth fighting, regardless of the political cost. Because surrendering them meant surrendering everything that made leadership morally legitimate. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as their investigation moved from meticulous evidence gathering into active confrontation with forces that had operated with impunity for years. The stakes extended far beyond one Maid's safety to encompass fundamental questions about whether noble privilege could be reformed through lawful means or whether corruption had become so entrenched that only dramatic action could restore the vital balance between power and responsibility. The High Lord of Stonehaven was prepared for whatever response their challenge would provoke. Yet he knew that victory would require more than strategic thinking. It would demand the courage to risk everything he had built for principles that transcended personal advancement or political convenience. The war for justice was escalating, and soon it would test whether righteousness could triumph over systematic corruption when backed by a determination that absolutely refused to accept defeat as an inevitable outcome of challenging established power structures that benefited from maintaining oppression through fear and chilling intimidation. The attack came at dawn, swift and vicious as a mountain storm breaking over unprepared travelers. Marius was returning from his morning ride through the eastern borders when crossbow bolts began whistling violently through the forest air, their steel points seeking flesh with an accuracy that spoke of professional military training rather than random banditry that might be dismissed as an unfortunate coincidence unrelated to his investigation. Ambush! Sir Gareth, his master-at-arms, shouted, wheeling his massive destrier toward the nearest cover while drawing steel that gleamed with deadly promise in the early morning light. Protect his lordship. The escort of 6 knights formed a tight defensive circle around Marius with a practiced efficiency that had been drilled through countless training sessions. Yet their attackers had chosen their ground well, dense woodland that limited mounted maneuvers while providing perfect concealment for archers whose positions remained hidden among the ancient oak trees that had witnessed centuries of violence in these disputed borderlands. 8 crossbowmen, possibly more. Kalen called from his position behind a massive boulder that offered crucial protection from projectiles while allowing observation of enemy movements through undergrowth that rustled with stealthy repositioning designed to maintain tactical advantage. Professional equipment, coordinated tactics. This is no random assault. Marius's mind raced through possibilities as he analyzed their tactical situation with a strategic thinking that had kept him alive through previous assassination attempts by ambitious rivals who had underestimated his preparedness for exactly this kind of direct action. The timing suggested clear coordination with his investigation into Torvin's criminal enterprise. Someone had decided that eliminating key witnesses and the High Lord himself was preferable to facing justice through legal proceedings that would expose systematic corruption. "Can we break through to open ground?" he asked Kalen, recognizing that their current position left them vulnerable to sustained assault that could gradually eliminate his escort while leaving him isolated and defenseless against enemies whose true numbers remained unknown. "Possible but costly," Kalen replied grimly. "They've positioned themselves to channel our movement toward a prepared killing ground, where additional forces may be waiting in reserve." Another volley of bolts forced them deeper into cover as steel points embedded themselves in tree trunks with impacts that demonstrated the sheer power behind weapons designed for killing armored opponents rather than simple intimidation or warning shots. "Your lordship," called Sir Gareth from his position behind a fallen log that provided temporary shelter. "We need to assume this attack is intended to prevent your testimony about certain criminal activities. His words were brutally cut short by a crossbow bolt that took him through the shoulder, spinning him around with a force that dropped him behind cover, while blood began staining his mail with spreading crimson that spoke of a serious injury requiring immediate attention they couldn't provide while under sustained assault. Rage flared violently in Marius's chest as he watched one of his most loyal knights fall victim to a cowardly attack from concealed positions. These weren't honorable enemies seeking fair combat. They were paid killers using terrain advantage to murder men whose only crime was serving a high lord who demanded justice for systematic abuse and corruption that threatened innocent people throughout his domain. "Kalen, take 2 men and circle south," he commanded with a voice that carried absolute authority despite their desperate circumstances. "Force them to divide attention while we push north toward the main road where reinforcements can reach us. I won't leave you with insufficient protection." "That's an order." Marius's tone brooked no argument despite the personal concern that motivated Kalen's reluctance to separate their already outnumbered force. "Those crossbowmen are professionals, but they're not expecting a coordinated assault from multiple directions. We used their confidence against them." The plan was desperate and risky. Yet, it offered their best chance for survival against enemies who had prepared this ambush with careful attention to preventing escape through normal routes that predictable traveling patterns would suggest. As Kalen departed with half their remaining force, Marius found himself thinking not of his own survival, but of Elara and the other witnesses, whose safety depended upon his ability to testify about the evidence they had gathered concerning Torvin's criminal enterprise. This assassination attempt confirmed their investigation had struck close enough to vital interests to trigger a desperate response from enemies who preferred murder to facing justice through legitimate legal proceedings. "Sir Davion, on my signal we charge the eastern position," he called to his remaining knight, a young man whose courage had been tested in border skirmishes. "Your lordship, the risk." "The risk of remaining passive exceeds the danger of decisive action," Marius interrupted, drawing his own sword with movements that felt natural despite years spent primarily in administrative duties rather than active combat. The charge broke cover with explosive violence that caught their attackers by surprise. Marius's destrier thundering through the undergrowth while his blades swept aside defensive positions that hadn't anticipated a direct assault from opponents who should have remained pinned down. Steel met steel with ringing impacts that echoed through the forest depths as professional killers discovered that their intended victim possessed combat skills to match his fearsome reputation for strategic intelligence. Marius's sword work demonstrated training that had never been abandoned, muscle memory guiding strikes that found gaps in armor, while his mount's hooves trampled enemies who had expected easy victory against a supposedly soft target. The fight ended with brutal efficiency as Kalen's flanking maneuver struck the remaining crossbowmen from an unexpected direction, eliminating threats that had seemed insurmountable when faced from prepared positions. "Too alive for questioning," Kalen reported as he secured prisoners whose equipment and training confirmed Marius's suspicions about a professional assassination attempt unrelated to random banditry. As they bound wounds and prepared for return to Stonehaven Citadel with evidence that would prove attempted murder by forces connected to their investigation, Marius understood that the war for justice had escalated beyond legal maneuvering into direct violence. Someone had decided that killing a High Lord was preferable to allowing testimony that would reveal systematic corruption. Such desperation suggested they were close to achieving victory that would destroy the criminal enterprise and restore the balance between power and responsibility that defined legitimate governance. The hunters had become the hunted, and their enemies' desperation would provide the final evidence needed to achieve a justice that no political influence could prevent or corrupt. The interrogation chamber beneath Stonehaven Citadel had extracted confessions from countless enemies over the centuries. Its massive stone walls bearing witness to truth forced from reluctant lips through methods that combined psychological pressure with physical discomfort designed to overcome resistance without permanent damage that might invalidate testimony. Now it hosted the 2 professional killers whose equipment and training confirmed every suspicion about the systematic nature of the opposition to Marius's investigation, corruption that extended far beyond Torvin Voss into sprawling networks of influence that had operated with impunity for years through intimidation and violence. Hired through intermediaries, the The first assassin admitted after hours of careful questioning that revealed the sophisticated nature of the conspiracy against local authority. Gold delivered through merchant contacts, orders given through coded messages that protected those who commissioned our services from direct implication in attempted murder. Marius studied the man with an analytical detachment that masked his growing fury at the evidence of a systematic conspiracy to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence that would expose crimes reaching into the highest levels of court authority. These weren't random brigands. They were soldiers in an undeclared war against justice itself. The intermediaries, Kalen pressed with a voice that carried the heavy threat of consequences for continued resistance to cooperation. A merchant named Corvin Blackthorn operates warehouses near the capital, the prisoner replied reluctantly. He coordinates messages between those who pay and those who kill, ensuring no direct contact that might expose the true sources of funding. The revelation provided crucial intelligence about the infrastructure supporting criminal operations that extended throughout the realm, suggesting coordination between corrupt nobles whose influence reached into royal administration itself. Exposing this network would require evidence that even the most powerful protectors couldn't dismiss as political maneuvering. Written orders? Marius inquired, recognizing that documentary evidence would prove essential for convincing royal authorities that systematic corruption threatened the foundation of lawful governance. Burned after reading, the assassin confirmed. But Blackthorn keeps records of payments received and services rendered. Insurance against betrayal by those who employ his network. Kalen exchanged a meaningful glance with Marius as the implications became clear. Financial records maintained by criminal intermediaries would provide irrefutable evidence linking corrupt nobles to systematic violence against witnesses and obstruction of justice through murder and intimidation. The location of these records? Kalen demanded. Before the assassin could respond, urgent knocking interrupted their session. Sir Davion entered with an expression that combined excitement with concern about developments that would affect their investigation's direction and ultimate success. "Your Lordship, Lord Aldous has arrived with royal investigators," Davion reported breathlessly. "They're carrying writs of examination for financial records related to systematic theft from crown resources and corruption of royal authority." The timing struck Marius as remarkably fortunate, or perhaps carefully coordinated through allies who understood that evidence gathering must proceed rapidly before enemies could destroy documentation. The Lord Commander's response? Marius asked, knowing that Torvin Voss would not surrender his nephew without a desperate attempt to protect his position. Barricaded himself in his estates with armed guards, Davion replied grimly. Claims illness prevents travel to court for testimony about accusations he describes as fabricated attacks. But royal investigators have issued warrants for the immediate arrest of Torvin Voss on charges of theft from crown resources and systematic corruption. The collapse of political protection represented a complete victory for their careful gathering of evidence. The witnesses? Secured in royal custody with full protection, Davion confirmed. Lord Aldous has guaranteed their safety and legal immunity in exchange for complete cooperation in investigations that will reform corrupt practices threatening royal authority. As afternoon settled over Stonehaven Citadel and news arrived of arrests throughout the criminal network, Marius reflected on how an investigation that began with a simple observation of abuse had evolved into comprehensive reform. Protecting Elara had become protecting principle itself. The Great Hall of Stonehaven Citadel buzzed with activity as royal investigators established their headquarters for conducting the most comprehensive investigation into noble corruption that the realm had witnessed in generations. Lord Aldous commanded the operation with the methodical precision that reminded Marius of his own administrative approach. The financial records from Blackthorn's warehouses confirm systematic theft spanning 3 years, Aldous reported. Conservative estimates suggest 50,000 gold crowns diverted from legitimate purposes to fund gambling debts, personal enrichment, and continuation of criminal activities. And the testimony from victims? Marius inquired, understanding that human stories provided the emotional context that transformed abstract crimes into personal tragedies. Overwhelming, Aldous replied. 23 individuals have provided detailed accounts of extortion, sexual assault, and intimidation designed to maintain silence. Elara entered the hall with quiet dignity, a remarkable transformation from terrified victim to confident witness. "My lord," she said, "Lord Aldous has requested that I review the final witness statements for accuracy." Her presence reminded Marius that this victory had emerged from a simple moral decision. "How are the others managing?" Marius asked. "Finding strength through solidarity," Elara replied with a genuine smile. "Knowing that our testimony serves a larger purpose helps overcome the fear of retaliation." The Lord Commander's situation? Arraigned on charges of harboring known criminals and obstruction of royal justice, Aldous reported. His armed resistance to lawful arrest warrants constitutes additional charges of treason against royal authority. The systematic destruction of the criminal enterprise demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated investigation backed by royal authority. As evening approached, Marius acknowledged that the personal satisfaction came not from political victory, but from the knowledge that Elara's courage had inspired systematic change that would protect future generations. Verdicts and consequences. The royal courtroom had been transformed into an arena for justice. The trial would determine whether privilege could be reformed through legal means. In the matter of Torvin Voss, accused of theft from royal resources, systematic extortion, and abuse of official position, the chief judge announced, "We find the defendant guilty on all charges presented." The courtroom was stunned into silence. The sentence is forfeiture of all lands and titles, followed by exile from the realm under pain of death. Elara's testimony followed, detailing the systematic patterns of abuse. "He claimed ownership over my person despite legal dissolution of contracts," she stated, her voice strong and clear. "Used violence and intimidation to maintain control." Then came the verdict for the Lord Commander. "In the matter of Torvin Voss, former Lord Commander, we find the defendant guilty of criminal conspiracy through willful blindness to systematic abuse of authority." The sentence included permanent removal from all official positions and forfeiture of half his estates. As the proceedings concluded, Marius reflected on the transformation. He had learned that protecting individual dignity could inspire systematic change when backed by evidence and supported by allies whose shared commitment to justice transcended political convenience. The royal summons lay open on Marius's desk. The king formally requested his service as chief royal investigator, a position that would make him one of the most powerful lords in the kingdom, but one that required permanent residence at court. It was the pinnacle of achievement, yet Marius felt dread. It would mean abandoning Stonehaven and abandoning Elara's direct protection. "You must accept, my lord," Master Aldous counseled. "It represents the pinnacle of political achievement. Refusing such honor would be interpreted as a rejection of royal confidence." But Marius found himself thinking only of Elara. "There are considerations beyond political convenience," he replied. A messenger interrupted them with news. Lord Blackthorn had declared open rebellion against royal authority in the eastern borders. "Insufficient royal forces for immediate response," Sir Davion reported. "The king requests that loyal lords mobilize their forces for a campaign." The military summons provided the perfect justification for refusing the court appointment without dishonor. It allowed him to serve the crown while remaining physically present in his domain's sphere of influence. "Prepare for campaign mobilization," Marius decided, the certainty in his voice surprising even him. "Send word to the king that High Lord Stonehaven chooses military service over administrative appointment, believing that direct action against rebellion serves royal interests more effectively." The decision was a complete reversal of his old, detached self. He was choosing personal commitment over political advancement and choosing the welfare of his people over abstract authority. Evening. The eve of his departure for the campaign. Elara arrived to discuss security arrangements. "Elara," he said, setting aside the paperwork. "We need to discuss something beyond administration. You have become important to me in ways that transcend feudal obligation." "I know," she replied, her gaze steady. "The protective anger you felt, the way you risked everything, I saw it transcend feudal obligation. It became a personal commitment." The investigation showed me that authority exists to serve individual dignity rather than abstract efficiency, he replied. That effective leadership requires emotional investment in specific outcomes affecting particular people. What happens when you return from campaign? She asked. That depends on whether you would consider accepting a position that honors your contributions while acknowledging the changed circumstances between us, he replied carefully. I am offering you partnership. I am offering you marriage. Her expression was a mix of awe and terror. Your lordship, are you certain? Marriage between a High Lord and a former scullery maid would scandalize all of court society. I am certain, he vowed. My effectiveness as a leader derives from my commitment to protecting those under my care, not from conformity to social expectations. Leadership without love becomes oppression. I don't need time, Elara replied, a brilliant, certain smile breaking across her face. I have been observing your transformation for months. I respect, admire, and love the man who risked everything for truth. Then we will be married upon my return from the campaign, he declared. You will serve as chatelaine, beginning immediately. Dawn brought the martial sounds of military preparation. The engagement ring, a simple gold band set with a sapphire, felt heavy in Marius's hand. He was preparing to leave for war, his personal life irrevocably changed. Your lordship, Kaelin observed, some members of the local nobility may require time to adjust to changed circumstances that challenge conventional expectations. She has proven her courage and intelligence beyond normal expectations, Marius countered. Administrative competence can be learned, but integrity cannot be taught. He presented Elara to the assembled household. During my absence, chatelaine Elara will exercise full authority over estate administration and household management. Her word carries the same weight as my own. The formal title provided legitimacy against the inevitable social challenges. As they stood alone before his departure, Elara asked, Are you certain about leaving estate management in my hands? I am certain, he replied. You possess the wisdom and integrity necessary for protecting those who depend upon local authority while serving principles that matter more than social approval. Marius departed, knowing his greatest challenge was not military strategy, but maintaining the emotional connection with the woman whose welfare had become his highest purpose. 3 weeks into the campaign, the inevitable political counterstrike arrived. An urgent dispatch bore Kaelin's emergency script. Elara has been arrested on charges of witchcraft and sedition. The enemies, Baron Hemlock and Lord Peton, had coordinated fabricated testimony claiming supernatural influence over household decisions, specifically timed to exploit Marius's military absence. Royal investigators arrived with writs, granting the religious authorities jurisdiction and circumventing local law. Marius's hands trembled with rage. He recognized the pattern: systematic persecution designed to eliminate an inconvenient witness and punish him for his unconventional choice. Timeline for trial proceedings? He demanded. Unknown, my lord. But they are preparing documentation confirming demonic possession and requiring immediate purification through fire. Elara faced execution. Marius made an immediate decision. Prepare immediate departure with escort sufficient for a forced march back to Stonehaven. My lord, leaving command without royal permission could be interpreted as desertion, his aide protested. Some responsibilities transcend military orders, Marius declared with absolute finality. Authority exists to protect those who depend upon our integrity, not to serve abstract interests that require sacrificing individual dignity. We ride now. The forced march pushed men and horses beyond endurance, fueled by Marius's desperate fear. Scouts confirmed that armed men wearing religious symbols had established checkpoints around Stonehaven, creating the illusion of a legitimate investigation while acting as an occupation force. The old smuggler caves that connect to the Citadel foundations, Marius instructed Kaelin. We must find a covert way in. Kaelin confirmed the tunnels were still viable, though enemy guards had been placed near the entrances. The intelligence from loyal retainers indicated Elara was being held in the lowest dungeon, where religious investigators could apply psychological and physical pressure in isolation. They should be finished by tomorrow evening, a captured guard had boasted, revealing their predetermined plan for execution by burning. The news drove Marius to reckless speed. He coordinated with Kalen to mask their scent trails with controlled smoke and flame to confuse the hunting dogs the enemy was using. The escape through the network of tunnels was their only chance. Marius moved through the ancient smugglers' tunnels with practiced stealth, guided by his intimate knowledge of the Citadel's architecture. His mind was focused entirely on reaching Elara before the mock trial concluded. He used precise blade work to silently eliminate the dungeon guards. Torchlight revealed the stone interrogation chamber, iron implements of torture, not for truth, but for forced confession. Elara hung suspended from chains, her clothing torn, her body marked with fresh evidence of systematic brutality. Yet her eyes, though exhausted, remained fiercely defiant. "Your lordship," she whispered, relief flooding her voice. "They seek confession of supernatural practices that never existed beyond the imagination of enemies." "Can you move?" he asked, swiftly cutting the heavy chains. "With assistance," she replied, her resilience astonishing. As the alarm bells began ringing throughout the citadel, signaling the discovery of their presence, Marius understood the rescue was only the beginning. He was extracting the key witness, and the enemies would stop at nothing to prevent her survival. The flight through the fire had begun. The corridors of Stonehaven echoed with shouts and the ringing of steel as the enemy forces mobilized. Marius supported Elara's weight, navigating passages while Kalen engaged the pursuers. The main gates were sealed. Their only chance was the old siege tunnels connecting to the external cave systems. They were forced to create a controlled fire to mask their scent trails and confuse the pursuing forces, buying them precious moments. The smoke and flame billowed through the stone corridors, forcing the enemy to divide its attention. Their path led toward the chapel crypts, the final connection to the escape tunnels. But the chapel entrance was held by Sir William's personal guard, the strongest defensive position. "They hold the chapel entrance," Kalen reported. "Then we go through them," Marius declared, his voice carrying the full weight of a ruler fighting for justice. Some objectives cannot be achieved through indirect approaches or strategic compromise. The assault on the chapel was a furious explosion of violence. Marius led the charge, his sword a deadly extension of his will, fighting for a principle more important than his own survival. "Surrender the witch," Sir William bellowed from his position behind the altar. "The only crime here is your systematic persecution of innocent individuals." Marius roared back. Marius engaged Sir William in single combat, a symbolic struggle between justice and corrupt privilege. William's skill was high, but his lack of moral conviction left him without the desperate drive that fueled Marius. The final resistance collapsed. "The way is clear," Kalen shouted as the escape route opened toward the external cave systems. Marius carried Elara to freedom, knowing he had risked everything to protect her. The victory was total, achieved through a moral commitment that transcended conventional power. 3 days later, safe in the forest clearing, Marius received confirmation. Lord Fairfax had documented the conspiracy between Sir William and the corrupt religious authorities. The charges against Elara were formally dismissed. The entire systematic persecution had been exposed. "Now we rebuild," Marius told Elara, his confidence absolute. "The investigation has exposed systematic corruption that will result in comprehensive reform." "What happens now?" she asked. "Our engagement remains valid," he declared. "If you still wish to proceed with marriage, that will challenge social conventions while honoring the truth that has emerged between us." "I wish nothing more," Elara replied, her face radiant. "I love the man who learned what true protection means." Marius had learned that his greatest victory was the transformation of his own heart. The silent terror that had once marked Elara was replaced by a confident partnership. The High Lord's authority now derived not from the stone of his citadel, but from his moral commitment to the one he loved. 6 months after their ordeal, Stonehaven Citadel buzzed with preparation for the wedding. The great hall, magnificent and restored, was set for the ceremony that would formally unite the High Lord and the former scullery maid. The king sent formal congratulations and an appointment for Marius as special counselor for administrative reform, validating his principled actions. Elara entered the hall, her gown crafted by the grateful castle staff. She was a confident chatelaine, a proven leader. Do you, Marius Stonehaven, take this woman as partner in all endeavors and guardian of principles that honor individual dignity above personal advancement? Brother Thomas inquired. I do, Marius replied, the certainty profound. Do you, Elara, accept partnership with someone whose protection and commitment honor your dignity while serving principles that transcend social boundaries? I do, she affirmed, her voice clear. Their marriage formalized the ultimate political lesson, that a ruler's strength is measured not by the power he holds, but by the love and protection he offers to the most vulnerable. Their partnership was the unassailable defense of Stonehaven. Thanks for joining us for this epic tale. If you want more stories of romance, power, and unexpected twists, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. What part of this story do you like the most? Let me know in the comments below.